Aphorism 60. To love men for the sake of God, that has been the noblest and most remote feeling attainted to among men up until now. That love of man without some sanctifying ulterior objective is one piece of stupidity and animal likeness. That the inclination to this love of man has first to receive its measure, its refinement, its grain of salt, and drop of amber from a higher inclination. However, man it was who first felt and experienced this, however much his tongue may have flattered as it sought to express such a delicate thought, let him be holy and venerated to us for all time, as a man who has soared the highest and gone the most beautifully astray. Aphorism 61. The philosopher as we understand him, we free spirits, as the man of the most comprehensive responsibility, who has the conscience for the collective evolution of mankind. This philosopher will make use of the religions for his work of education and breeding, just as he will make us the use of existing political and economic conditions. The influence on selection and breeding, that is to say, the destructive as well as the creative and the formative influence which can be exercised with the aid of the religions, is manifold and various on the kind of man placed under their spell and protection. For the strong and independent prepared and predestined for command, in whom the art and reason of the ruling race is incarnated. Religion is one more means of overcoming resistance, so as to be able to rule as a bond that unites together ruler and ruled, and portrays and hands over the former the consciousness of the latter, all that is hidden and most intimate in them, which would like to exclude itself from obedience. And if some natures of such noble descent incline through lofty spirituality to a more withdrawn and meditative life, and reserve to themselves only the most refined kind of rule, over select disciplines or brothers, then religion can even be used as a means of obtaining peace from the noise and effect of cruder modes of government, and cleanliness from the necessary dirt of all politics. Thus did the Brahmins, for example, arrange things with the age of of religious organization. They gave themselves the power of nominating their kings for the people, while keeping the feeling themselves aside and outside as men of higher and more than kingly tasks. In the meantime, religion also gives a section of the ruled guidance and opportunity for preparing itself for future rule and command. That is to say, those slowly rising orders and classes in which through fortunate marriage customs the strength and joy of the will to self-mastery is always increasing. Religion presents them with sufficient instigations and temptations to the take of the road to higher spirituality. The test of feelings of great overcoming, of silence, of solitude, asceticism, and Puritanism are virtually indispensable means of education and ennobling if a race wants to become master over its origins in the rabble and work its way up towards the future. The ordinary man, finally, the great majority, who exist for service and general utility, and who may exist only for that purpose, religion gives an inevitable contentment with their nature and session, manifold peace of heart, the noble kind of obedience, one piece of joy and sorrow more to share with their fellows, and soon transfiguration of the whole everydayness, the whole lowliness, the self-bestial property of the souls. Religion and the significance of life sheds sunshine over these perpetual drugs, and makes their own sight tolerable to them. It has the effect which of an Epicurean philosophy usually has on sufferers of a higher rank, refreshing, refining, as if it were making the most use of suffering, ultimately and even signifying and justifying. Perhaps nothing in Christianity and Buddhism is so venerable as their art of teaching even the lowliest to set themselves through pity, in an apparently higher order of things, and thus to preserve their contentment with the real order within which they lived hard enough lives and necessarily have to. Aphorism 62. In the end, to be sure, to present the debt side of the account of these religions, and to bring into light the day their uncanny perilousness, it cost dear and trebly when religions held sway, not as much of education and breeding in demands of the philosopher, but in their own right and as a sovereign when they themselves want to be final ends and not means beside other means. Among men, as among every other species, there is a surplus of failures, of the sick, the degenerate, fragile, of those who are bound to suffer. The unsuccessful cases are, among men too, always the exception. And considering that man is the ultimate animal whose nature has not yet been fixed, this is a rare exception. But worse still, the higher type of man, a man that represents the greater the probability he will turn out will. The chance, the law, the absurdity, and the total economy of mankind shows itself to the most dreadful shape in its destructive form on higher men, whose conditions of life are subtle, manifold, and difficult to compare. Now, what is the attitude of the above named two chief religions towards this surplus of unsuccessful cases? They seek to preserve, retain life. They've always wanted to preserve. Indeed, they side in the matter of principle as religious for sufferers. They maintain that all those who suffer from life, as from the illness, are in the right and would like every other feeling of life to be counted false and become impossible. But he who was shunned on this European 18th century, the will to have this sublime resignation, this opposite desire, is no longer Epicurean, but that the same divine hammer in his hand approached the delicate generation and became degenerate in the eyes of man, thanks to the constitutes of Roman Catholicism, namely, in the sense, Protestantism. What I'm saying is Christianity has been the most vital kind of self presumption ever. Welcome, everyone. Today, before this is the final episode of part 3, the religious nature of Beyond Good and Evil. I've invited another guest. Please introduce yourself.
Hi one, hi all. My name is Mila. It's 1:11 here right now. um, what can I say about myself? Um, I am I am living, coexisting in this dream lila so-called reality in devotion to consciousness, in devotion to the life that has created all of this, in devotion to the divine, the formless, the infinite, and also the human and our humanness, and bridging these realms together, coexisting, dancing, shadow and light, very much polarities, the way I perceive this world and the way I work within my own psyche, my own world, and the way I extend that as a gift to others to help them into self-realization. It's been my path as long as I remember, and it's at this point the only path I know. And words are so limited, and I'm just pointing to whatever the receiver can receive through these words in the moment. And just grateful to be here. So thank you, Gregory.
Appreciate Mila for accepting the invitation too. And to clarify, one of her great friends, Christopher, invited her to the academy. And I'm notorious for saying and advertising the academy, but in this sense, this is the first time we've had the opposite gender in our academy, which was a pleasant. And as you said, words can't describe, and I can't describe the emotions of the time that you brought
Mm.
in the academy.
Mm. Oh, thank you. It's such a beautiful reflection to receive. Thank you.
You're
I'm honored.
welcome. Outside of guiding yourself in the infinite, do you guide other people?
Yes, that has naturally come to be my service, and it shows up in many different forms. But I do like to use the word guiding. It feels more humble and less about what I am doing.
Mm-hmm.
I really see myself as an instrument, a vessel for source to move through me. And it's about the emptying out so I can more clearly navigate this guidance so it comes through me in the most clear ways possible.
Similar to an overflowing cup, and
Mm,
disperse the waters of this cup for others.
yes, yes, from that place feels the most natural, effortless, in alignment for me. And I also know what it's not to be in that, because we often tend to learn through contrast. So I am currently deepening even more so, and my main focus is to be in that expression, whatever it takes. Like that's my focus, and everything else comes from that space.
Be delightful, as Theodore Roosevelt once said.
Such a great word.
Oh, he used it every time. Same with the word bully. If he acknowledged a person that was in his eyes wrongdoing, he'd say bully, and everybody would turn their heads, say, "Why do you say that word?" And they saw this wrongdoer in front of him from his eyes. That's a partial and brief history of Theodore Roosevelt and his trust busting years of the economy. Him versus the elites. But
Trust busting. That's another great
that's
phrase
that's
I haven't actually heard.
that's what's hysterical is with his trust busting, he did the majority of the time he did do it, but his successor, William Howard Taft, amplified it times 10 of the trust busting, of limiting the elites' grasp and control of the economy.
Mm,
And
mm,
in Theodore Roosevelt's eyes, he thought he didn't trust bus a single bit, which which was his fault for separating the Conservative Party and creating a Bull Moose Party, which is another section of the Conservative Party, and we have Woodrow Wilson, which he entered after Taft. And I say why? Because Woodrow Wilson, yes, he industrialized the United States, but at the same time, he pushed his racial agenda on people.
mm, mm. Well, back to the trust busting, I feel we're at pivotal times that this is shall occur or is occurring or is meant to occur in these times.
Yes, the trust busting at this time, and what is relevant to today's analysis of the final aphorisms of the first part three, is love
Hmm.
and the trust busting of what's true and masked love, or in other words, fake love. And Nietzsche associates this in a religious context of to love men for the sake of God. That first that first sentence or first bit of words he is immediately saying to love men is to love in the name of equality.
Mm,
To
mhm,
simplify, Nietzsche is not a fan or loves the flavor of equality. In a sense, he prefers an unequal off balance of how nature functions. Does
mm,
nature treat its animals equally? No. Why is there carnivores devouring herbivores? And why aren't herbivores devouring carnivores? It's that unequal balance or off balance.
mm,
So his proposition here is how people, either religious or spiritual or not religious, and continuing the ideas of religion, have the sense of civil equality under law. In this sense, under the law of God.
mm,
He continues forward that this has been the noblest and remote feeling obtained among men until now. Why is it this the noblest and remote feeling? Because they were taught selfishly that they were the noble and higher type of men in the, in the name of God. So God deemed them as the noblest and higher, but I'm the most higher and the most noblest because I created you. So it's a form of, yeah, we'll give you this and that, but I have to remind you that I'm this.
mm,
So
mm.
it's the unequal love, but at the same time it's for the sake of God. What's your initial thoughts of that?
Hmm. Well, from what you're sharing, what I'm hearing, I can't help but think of just the paradox of everything, in a way, a paradox, even if in perspective or understanding of so-called the totality of expression on something, and there's still like paradox in that view. um, when it comes to, for example, the equality piece, and how things are not equal, which you were sharing based on this or that through Nietzsche perspective. And I feel, yes, I can agree to that. And there is another side of it based on perspective and
Mm-hmm.
view that can contradict this. And I can start with an example with the devouring. In a way, something is always devouring something.
Yes.
They're just, maybe they're devouring different thing, maybe it's a different expression. Who's to say that bigger or smaller expression of devouring is not equal? It, the whatever the creature or us or our lower nature or anything, it's maybe having just the same experience even if it looks different. So
Mm-hmm.
there's the quality here that I'm tracing. uh, so, and then around, I mean, first of all, like, I don't know if this is kind of, I feel like we're meant to analyze his words. I don't want to like have um, my own interpretation. So I'm wondering how to navigate this conversation where I am analyzing his words. Yet, what I was getting, at least in the beginning stages, what I was receiving of his perspective on love, in which I really agree, and what I was, my insights were that there are conditions we place on love, or like the love as the expression, even like regarding God and people, and God's love living in people, or God being an extension, or us being an extension of God. And even within that, there feels like, yeah, we are placing a certain type of concept, which any concept
Mm-hmm.
has a certain limitation within it.
Yeah. And with that limitation, there's a another concept that overcomes this weaker form of concept and becomes a higher. form of said concept, which I immediately think of the quote from Heraclitus. His Heraclitus uses the element fire and how the warlike experience of life is, and he associates that with fire.
Mm,
And the quote is, "All things change to fire, and fire exhaust falls back into things."
mm,
To simply say that this fire, it overcomes everything, but once it's exhausted, it falls to itself again. Not in a positive or negative sense, but overcoming oneself. And outside of oneself, he was a mystical person. He loved the cosmos and how the cosmos played with one another.
mhm. That's beautiful. Very much speaking my language. I'm receiving that really deeply.
It
Thank you.
speaks my language too. It spoke with Nietzsche because he read the fragments of Heraclitus. There's a great idea of Nietzsche of the eternal reoccurrence. The eternal reoccurrence is from a it's the opportunity of once you die, there's no afterlife or or pre-established doctrine or story. He says that once you die, you relive your life in every event, both positive and negative. You can't rewrite it. And he says to his people, or not to his people, but to people, would you want to do that all over again? And in his eyes, um, the people who say no are the ones who deny life. And
Mm,
it's pain, inherited pain and suffrage. But the
mm,
people who say yes to this are the free spirits or the affirmers of life who desire this this self-conquest as their source of joy.
That is
And
so beautiful. Yeah. Mhm.
he grabbed this idea from Heraclitus of the cyclical nature of seasons, or the seasonal occurrence, say with now we're in winter, and when spring approaches, life gives birth to itself again.
Yes. 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 As we are, yeah, that mirroring of nature, that we actually also have our own internal cycles. We have our own winter and summer, and when things gotta die in our life or shed or sprout again. And the notion also that what you mentioned around like looking back and reliving the life you have lived, I feel this is also an experience we can do right now. And
Hmm.
I in this life, and I feel this is a lot what I do. I go naturally happens as I uncover the unconscious and subconscious. I go back, from childhood, and all these memories then start coming up, my adolescence and all of that, and I get to relive them, really look at them in order to gather the gems, the lesson, the understanding of the self, of the psyche, of human relations. I mean, there's just so much in there. And I see it as an essential and integral piece for us to be more in our wholeness as individuals. We gotta look back. We gotta look to the past. We gotta look of what has happened in order to make sense, re-engage it in a more awakeful, conscious way, and then that creates freedom because, right?
Yes, and the principle of power or self-mastery,
Mm,
how to receive our power, not in a Machiavellian sense that ties to politics, but the power of our psyche, our soul or spirit, or the mind.
yeah.
And Nietzsche is a lover of power, but he says yes, you can obtain and receive power till you're pleased, but once you're overflowing with this power, it's time to discharge it in a creative, experimental, becoming sense.
Mhm.
Or I said earlier the analogy of the overflowing cup and dispensing it to other people. That's
Yes.
the expression of power that Nietzsche loves. Not
Yes, because
both.
if the water is overflowing, then it will be, but not share with others, it will just be wasted water. It's meant to be either given to the earth or its people, and that brings more life, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
nurtures life.
And that's the delightful psychology of Nietzsche, and he has these psychological propositions and um, conclusions which perfectly uh, which perfectly states of how he sees love. Now, in this sense, he has multiple interpretations, and he's multifaceted of how he sees love. But in this context, this love of man connected to religion.
Mhm.
When he criticizes Christianity, it's not Roman. He criticizes the three denominations, but the one he's targeting is Protestantism, the one that he was taught and fostered in, primarily the liberal arts of Protestantism versus the Orthodox form. Liberal in the sense of not political, but it can transfer to political, but in the sense of progressive, being open and ambiguous of the versus what is traditional and conserved. That was his criticism of Protestantism. He says it here too. But the love of man, something without sanctifying a objective piece of idiocy and animal-like childishness. This inclination of this love of man has first received itself as a form of measure, refinement, at a grain of salt and a drop of amber for a higher inclination. Whatever man it was who first felt and experienced this, he says experience in air quotes, so it's his irony there. However much his tongue may have flattered, as it sought to express such a delicate thought, let him be holy and venerated to us for all time as the man who has soared the highest and gone the most beautifully astray. This isn't him complimenting the religious man. This is him criticizing.
Right.
Is he criticizing the religious man? And I say this to my viewers, watch my videos, but this I'll elaborate. He criticizes the religious man or religions because of their unchecked pride or selfishness,
Mm.
where they negate this material world for something immaterial, where they frown upon this world and its imperfect flaws versus something that's perfect and flawless, something painless versus this pain infected world. And he says that this objective of this form of love is idiotic and almost an animal childishness, as measuring and refining and having a grain of respect of salt and amber for this world, but having a bucket full of amber and salt of respect for
Mm.
a higher world for them. This is there's a German word that he uses in another work. It's the Hinterwelt, which it's translate to beyond world or afterworld, which he doesn't say here because this is his early maturation of how he saw Christianity, which he'll be mature once I read Genealogy of Morals. And and now the impulse or experience has affected the tongue or grabbed the tongue to not speak of this higher world, also came with a delicate thought that this is now holy and respected place, as at all times to man, for them to soar higher and become beautifully astray. And earlier, he says, earlier in Beyond Good and Evil, he'd say that's a form of pessimism, where you're renouncing and having a permanent ascetic style of life on Earth, negating worldly pleasures or worldly values, not pleasures, worldly values for something valueless and nothing.
Mm.
What's your initial thoughts on that?
Whew.
Thought provoking, yes.
I feel so much is coming up to unpack. Oh gosh. Well, it's first of all, it's helpful for me to hear a little bit of your little interpretations there because I almost had like an opposite understanding coming through that he's talking more about the senses and being in this world. than the going in, like focusing more on the higher realms and making this world less of value. And so it's really helpful to hear it from you and get a better understanding. Um,
Appreciate it.
One thing that was coming up for me, I can't help it, have to just name it. It's from religion and then comes to spirituality. The spiritual ego, that even how yeah, there's this whole notion of going up and out of the body, and yes, it's better to ascend, to be enlightened, to come to return to the light, and with that whole idea that the light is up there, out there, and it's a better place to go to, and this is where we're meant to go to. And in that notion there's a lot of um, yeah, making this earthly earthly life less valuable. And this is something I personally feel, that as above so below, as within so without, meaning the earth is the higher realms. The higher realms are the earth. It's one and the same. It's the belief that we're separate from something that creates a comparison, that creates less, more polarization, expression. So even just speaking about that, I feel the painful misconception that that points to, and in a way, I can feel the pain he's expressing through the words, what he's pointing to. That is very relevant in in this now for humanity.
And the he was the seismograph for um the death of God itself. And we just, well, I said this earlier that the uh, the quote, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, murderers of all murderers, wipe the blood off of these knives?" It's metaphorical because he's not speaking in a physical sense of a physical God. He's speaking of what is attributed to the naturehood of, or the supernaturehood of an acting God. He saw it in arts, philosophy, religion, and science too. That what is superseding or substituting as a godlike figure or object. So
Yes.
nowadays, and this is not him lamenting or being gloomy of the death of God. He sees it as an opportunity for, as we segue to this next aphorism, he sees that as an opportunity and responsibility to revalue what was once valued,
Hmm. To
aka
revalue what was once valued.
aka being nonconformist to a conformed society.
Yeah, so he's really shining a light on the totality of what's been or what is, in order to invite maybe a fresher perspective, a new understanding. It's kind of like, without knowing the shadow aspect of something, how can we know
True.
the right? Mhm.
And he realized early that this polarity and tension is crucial for a higher conscious or higher sentiments and molding of ideas. It's similar to the bow and arrow and shooting for the distant target, where the arrow is ambition, the bow is named tension or strength, and they
Mm,
have the strength to propel that ambition to the distant target that's named goal in one's life or in a collective life.
mm,
And similar to in a metaphysical sense, not in a when I say metaphysical, as a fluid, dynamic metaphysical, nothing static and still. Um, Everything beyond our physical grasp. Say, for example, asteroids or the cosmos, other galaxies. It's beyond our grasp, but they too play in what Nietzsche saw as a dynamic and the relation between the dynamics. They work together, but they're still opposite. They complement one another.
Yes,
That
yes. They're an integral part. They constantly coexist together in the spectrum of that dimension energy, like pain, pleasure, the subconscious, the unconscious, consciousness. We can't know one without the other. That's what, if you're moving from non-dual to dual perspective, this is how I feel we are in a physical reality to experience the polarity dimension of energy. That else, if we're in a formless reality, we're just maybe experience the totality all at the same time, but we cannot distinguish the different aspects of it that play an integral part with each other, that coexisting, that synergy that is actually always constantly alive. We're meant to recognize these integral aspects in order to bring wholeness, coherence into understanding, I suppose.
I agree. And there's a aphorism to say what you're saying beautifully here in the Joyful Science, where I'm paraphrasing, he's distinguishing how pleasure and pain are two opposites, but they complement one another. If you're seeking pleasure, anticipate some pain. If you're seeking pain, anticipate some pleasure.
Yes.
And there in the final words and sentences, well, the final statements that he's saying in that aphorism, he says one can wait for the sickness unto death, while at the same time they can wait for the highest jubilation of their life, aka what I said earlier: seek pain, anticipate pleasure. Anticipate seeking pleasure, anticipate some pain.
Yes, which leads me towards, as long as we're seeking one or the other, there'll always be the play of both. It makes me wonder what happens when we cease seeking,
Mm-hmm.
when we are just in the beingness of what is. I wonder if that will be the middle path. that
And yes, and if you're curious of the balance or equilibrium or middle path of what Nietzsche has, as I said earlier, there's this slave and master morality, but he proposes a opposite I morality where it combines the two because the master morality, I'll say briefly here, the master morality, they saw that unconscious actions were innocent. That became a naive, and Nietzsche respects and loves the master morality, but he realized that it became a naive, idiotic, blind, and simple route to be natural. Because the master saw cruelty as natural in life, or innocent in life. If so, why not act on that violence and cruelty? And you see where that naive view comes in. He saw it too, because once the master began saying, I am the master, and I see that you're not, I will do what I want to do on you. And Nietzsche said that you're becoming a slave here. You're attached to the pleasure of violence.
Mm,
Is he denouncing violence? No, he realizes it as a necessary tool in certain situations.
mm,
That violence translated to the slave morality, where they said if you commit these authoritarian, dictatorial violence and hinder everybody, you'll be guilty of it. So the master became guilty, who used violence for the source and means, and now he's the guilty man.
Mm,
So it's the unconscious innocence and the conscious guilt to distinguish the two.
mm,
The solution is for Nietzsche, and he saw this as a possibility in the future with the free spirits, which if you're conscious of this or not, we're covering 61 and quickly, which is great. Um, outside of the uh, the the collective evolution of conscious, which educates and breeds and preserves this conscience in the religious sense, but it ties to what we're saying. The third option is the extramoral age, something beyond this moral age and pre-moral age. Pre-moral age, which was the master morality, and modern moral age is the slave morality. And he's saying combine the two, and it becomes a morality beyond resentment and guilt, plus beyond the superstition of the ego or the selfishness, or not. Well, the idea of ego, because he disagrees with the idea of ego as a fiction which became a reality.
mm,
To continue forward of the extramoral age, he he complements slave morality because we became conscious of ourselves. The extramoral person is conscience, but in the sense of conscious innocence, redeeming themselves of vengeance or resentment and redeeming fate for themselves. So it's a selfish act. Well, it's a selfish and selfless. Selfless in the sense of redeeming themselves. Selfish of affirming themselves and their values and their fate and not sacrificing themselves for names, titles, and what other validation society imposes upon everybody.
mhm, mhm,
While at the same time, the extramoral age is the bridge for life of affirmation, becoming, self reflection, and, as I said, conscious innocence. Now, when we enter a state of stagnation, which he says that's necessary, a stagnant episode of your life, plus with this tension, that it's a sign of growth or the heightening and increasing of health and growth. He he says additionally to that of this growth that it's not a sign to revert it to the master morality. Why? Because that morality became extinct, courtesy of the slave morality, which revalued and changed everything from the physical to the mental and the psychological in between. And again, Nietzsche loves his psychological propositions, which, if you agree or disagree, become realities in a sense. From his propositions and instigations too, he has he has lofty ones at times. Not reverting to this master morality, it creates a post or beyond morality for his free spirits. Now, what is a free spirit? It's the person or individual who liberates themselves from modern and moral, or modern and societal concepts, including the morality, which the
mhm,
master morality doesn't do, but they simply negate and deny the slaves. So it's a tension between two extremes. And the solution of those two extremes is the extramoral person or post moral in the sense of modernity moral.
And what is the definition of that when you don't apply to any moral or immoral concepts?
The, the, the simple definition is, which at times I don't prefer a simple definition because of the words are static and don't have a fluid emotional appeal from the
Mm,
thoughts,
mhm,
from the roaming and fluid thoughts. But a simple definition of these concepts or realities is that it's an opportunity for creativity, curiosity, experimentation as the innocent child. While the child is innocent, at the same time it's forgetting. Why does it forget? Because it's unconcerned of what it's unconcerned who it's with. Similar to a child at play. When you hand it a toy, it's at play for some time till it forgets it and continues forward. Similar
Mhm.
to the play of life, we are handed delightful, and at times we dutifully play with this toy. But at the same time, when when humans become or greedy and covetous, they overcome this weak toy for a stronger and higher toy. And Nietzsche associates that with power. When weak powers enter our life, both internally and externally, it's time to overcome those weak powers for stronger and higher powers.
Mm.
Not in the sense of repressing and hindering other people or ourselves, or not, or no self-punishment or punishment to others. He says that's a weak-minded mindset. We're inflicting pain on others because they're powerful. The strong mind in Nietzsche's mind is that they don't demonstrate to themselves or others that that they're strong. It naturally happens.
Mm. Mhm.
He associates that as the spirituality of the free spirits, who
Mm.
liberate themselves while at the same time are cheerful and approachable in the times of sickness, inactivity, and isolation. So, say if you're in a gloomy state of mind, and a free spirit approaches you, and it lightens your heart that was weighed down with mud and gloom. So, thus, they grabbed your heart or spirit from the doom and gloom and heightened it. That's the time of isolation and activity and sickness. And Nietzsche says that this sickness is a benefit unto health.
Mm. Mm. I love all of this so much, and it's so relatable. I feel so much of this, the childlike play and this creative energy. I feel it's the creative energy. It's what dictates this effortless expression. The creative energy to allow to overtake us. And this example, how in a child first when it starts to play, that creative energy is starting. It's unfolding, and then as it picks up that power to grow and to go to higher states, then it naturally wants a bigger toy, for example, right?
Yes.
It naturally wants to, it's growing towards that. And that is a natural, effortless way of the way the creative energy moves. It's when the human takes it and directs it in a way that is that greed that you speak of. Um, and maybe it's not inclusive
Hmm.
to the totality of of the whole, and it's for selfish reasons or manipulation or whatever, instead of being just this allowing for that creative energy to take over in a way, however that's gonna show up. And I feel naturally, because this creative energy is an extension of life, it's life creating, pulsating, moving through us, um, can't help but be for the benefit of all. it's it's
True.
it's directly because it's in connection with life. But if we take over and misuse that power, this is where it's, yeah, it becomes a whole different unnecessary manipulation. And yeah, I just love the childlike so much because it's something I've been going deeper within my own life and in my service, really connecting with that child, like restoring the innocence and the play, and allowing it to come alive uncontrived from societal norms, points of views, and just dismantling any type of validation that I may be seeking from the so-called outside. I feel it's the foundation for us to stand upon, that we are the children of life itself, and it's time to start acting like children.
And including laughter, as we did.
Yes.
Ni-
Oh my gosh.
The the flaw with individuals reading Nietzsche and the interpretation, they think he's a serious, bluntful, and nihilistic man. But at the same time, he loves a disciplined, serious, and vigorous life, but what accompanies that? Play, dance, singing, being Dionysian in a sense.
Mm,
What you were saying is his opposite, or his opposite morality, or the extramoral, where the man is exuberant, a world-affirming man, where he learns and treats everything as if desiring it again, eternally, having this insatiable calling to this moment or event again and again as a piece of play. And from this fundamental piece of play, it becomes necessary to him that he wants himself again and again. So it's this selfishness, not in a judgmental or in societal sense, which selfishness now is judged and punished because of somebody being outside of what is the norm. Selfishness in this sense is a noble soul who loves unconditionally themselves, while at the same time creating them that have this self-creation of values, comparing them to others and saying, yeah, I'd rather have what I'm going for in an active sense versus what they're proposing or advertising out.
yes, and that takes self-knowing to really know what feels good, what feels right, this self-discovery of what are actually my values, and to follow that.
While at the same time, and I said earlier that the master moralities of good and bad, the child uses the good and bad because both moralities, slave and master, are examples. For the master, bad is an afterthought because it resources the good. It's a complement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For the slave, they've reinvented bad as evil and renamed everything in the name of sin. Thus, Nietzsche criticizes what is victorious, and he saw that the slaves were, or the slave morality was victorious, and the people justifying those symptoms of conditions as as for for this preserving of life. And he says in the long term, if this continues, there will be there's nothing will be bad and nothing will happen. Nothing not extravagant, but nothing explosive, experimental, and creative.
Mm-hmm.
So the tension between the two is the resulting of the child, as we said, because the child sees the slave master morality as an afterthought, the same how the master sees bad as an afterthought, because it fuels the extra moral, it fuels the affirmation of life, which involves the Latin phrase amor fati, the love of one's fate.
Mm-hmm.
And the child says yes to that fate as a prodigal and as a will propelling forward.
Mm-hmm.
While at the same time, the child has the lion inside him. That lion is saying no to everything it contempted. And the contempt here is its previous self. It contempted and was ashamed. Well, not ashamed, but contempted and and violently tarnished its previous self for being inferior, for being weak and being pitied on and self-pitying.
Mhm.
So why is the lion saying no to everything in the past but not creating itself? Enter the child. It says yes to life. It has this self-creation. It convalesces. Why does it convalesce? Because it's the art of dying. The art of dying, in this sense, is the self-creation.
Yeah.
Realizing that you're on an island in between two seas, and you convalesce and scream to the sky, but at the same time, you go under, and you overcome it for going over,
Mm.
and not having a linear path, which,
Yeah.
with excluding the lyricism, ties to what Nietzsche saw in the religions, which we've covered everything in 61 outside of what he's proposing. But the one portion we didn't cover is the education and breeding of the religions. He saw that this form of despair and self-preservation, as he would see it, as where the religions educate, inculcate, and inbreed in everybody this fear of what? Is it the fear of God, or is it the fear of law that you have created in the name of something that I can't see or worship to?
Mhm.
AKA, when people read religious texts, what's their interpretation here? What's their moral aim? If if moral even, is it amoral? What's their interpretation if they're using the knowledge to understand or misunderstand its essence? And that becomes a spiritual power in the sense of controlling and manipulating others. The to briefly um, inject politics in this, the the Chinese people for millions, not millions, but for millennia realized that the West, with their hierarchy of finance, that they became self-indulgent from the fear of not sacrificing for their company or for themselves. There's a Muslim philosopher named of Ibn Khaldun, and his proposition of the fourth generation aristocrats was that they didn't sacrifice themselves. Self-sacrifice in this sense for a higher perfection. A higher perfection, refine, not molding and reinterpreting and readapting to what was not sacrificed in the name of excellence. And Nietzsche sees that same with Ibn Khaldun and other philosophers and other people see it as a form of progress and development versus progress in a utilitarian sense, what is practically useful versus practically not useful or dreadful and life hindering, as the utilitarians use. So, if you tie it to Ibn Khaldun's fourth generation aristocrats, to how the Chinese saw the West and the economic aristocracy, he saw that these extravagant and lavish buyings and purchasings were, in a sense, from their amenities um and financial buildings that they brought up and what that their other generations brought up for them. They're using the money and the energy and resources as as a form of self-punishment for not sacrificing. And that itself preserves the system.
Mm. It's like overcompensating.
Yeah. And Nietzsche saw that in religion, how it overcompensates, educates, and breeds a life reserving and denying essence.
Mhm.
And outside of religion, he saw it in science, art, and philosophy. And if you include music, and to me, I'm not a fond person of this modern music of pop, rap, and distortion, uh, wrongly distortion of lyrics and the symbolism of those lyrics, where the person isn't enunciating the words. Yes, I'm a metalhead to heart, but outside of metal, yeah, outside of metal, I love classical orchestra, and I love to hear jazz and ancient music at times because it unlocks the emotions that were in hidden places, and from that it heightened my perfection. For well, to quote Nietzsche, my melancholy loves to hide in hidden places, and for perfection, and that is why I need music. Why? Music unlocks the locked hidden places for something to be unblemished or perfected,
Yes.
which is practically everything we've covered in 60, 61, 62, and not reading it for a second time, which is fascinating in that I love it.
Great. Yes. Innovative expression,
Yes.
innovative approach, I suppose.
Before we conclude this, what's your initial thoughts of everything that was said today, outside of Nietzsche or inside of Nietzsche too?
Oh gosh, I feel all that we covered and spoke to is, to me, it's just so much of what I am in a way constantly contemplating and working to dismantle any any of these moral, non-moral, what love is, what God is, just this full spectrum of totality. I feel you covered pretty much every part of human existence and what are we doing here and why are we doing it, and like taking a really honest look in the you can call it shadow, subconscious, programmed aspects, behaviors, patterns within
Hmm.
human history, and as humans, now that we know it, it's not much has changed. It's just constantly. In some ways it has, and in many ways, we still see it in the world. Meaning that there is just this, I feel, opportunity constantly to choose something different. And when you speak of the child and the creativity, to me just brings so much aliveness and inspiration and confirmation for me of what I've been receiving and guided to really focus on. And the more I focus on that child to come alive and for that creative energy to come alive, I feel there's a natural effortlessness that breaks down all the moral codes or all the polarities. It kind of like things just fall away naturally because that
Hmm.
creative energy in a way just it's so alive. It's life itself, and just naturally removes anything that's not of that. So there's just I'm just so pleasantly surprised to be introduced to Nietzsche because honestly I haven't really read
Hmm.
him, and to have this analysis from what I heard in the beginning and then what you brought forth, it's so much more than what I was receiving or the point of view, and getting more to the heart of of his expression, which to me is very valuable, and it's actually it feels so resonant for me. There's just so much similarity and resonance there. I
And
feel. we're at a precipice where so much it speaks to this choice. By being aware of the totality, by having a clear view on all that is perspiring, all the energies, all the polarities, the shadow, the light, we then can have a choice of what to choose from that space. And we learn through contrast, we learn through experience, and simultaneously, there's this higher order that wants to just fully land here through this body vessel that is beckoning us. And I feel every person, if actually they really get truly honest with themselves, they realize that they are also hearing this beckoning.
That's what you're describing is Nietzsche's spiritual journey, not in the separation of soul and body, which he disagrees with, but the unification of these polarities. Now, he uses soul and spirit in a Renaissance and ancient Greco Roman sense, spirit and soul, where it ties with the free spirit who begins their free spiritual journey in the form of convalescence. And I heard you say energy. The convalescent, their energy, it results from the final solitude, the final moment of transformation and becoming, in the sense of the difficult tasks. The task included asceticism and hardship, which results the sickness unto health. And Nietzsche said earlier, both in this episode and other episodes, that he was a man stricken with ailments, but he overcame them daily before his mental collapse in 1889. And people theorized they had syphilis. He didn't have syphilis. His personal doctor, including his mother, said multiple times that he was diagnosed with CADASIL. CADASIL is a inherited disease, which well, not a disease, but an inherited ailment, sickness, something. It's an inherited trait that he had from his father because his father died from liquidation of the brain, which resulted from a stroke, series of strokes.
You're nothing like a disease in the body. And what is disease? Not to be at ease in the body, to bring us back to that choice point that will either fully collapse in the sickness or it will
Hmm.
propel us, motivate us to come into power.
Which, again, perfectly ties with he said not solely in what he said here, but earlier of that the convulsion of these impulses and thoughts, ideas, and desires became an epilepsy, in the sense of altering what was once primordial, but to now that is civilized and controlled.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brought him into that state. The sickness brought him in, sick through, in and through to the other side, mm, because there was probably some type of surrender, let go, giving in of control to take over.
And the justification of those conditions, conserving those conditions of being being mediocre, passive, powerless, and not overcoming your state in the first form of self-commanding, which is crucial to not solely you and I and Nietzsche, but to everybody that I'll be reading on this channel and outside of this channel. It's crucial for everybody. But to to the context of Nietzsche, he sees that the opportunity isn't naturally for everybody, where it's it's the strength and independence are the opportunistic forms for the predestined people. He sees
Mm,
this as a genetical course,
mm,
where if it was hindered in this, or if it was repressed and hindered in this string of families, it must have come from past generations before your parents, grandparents, great grandparents that erupted inside of you.
mhm,
So these passions that were, mm, in in a sense, mudded and trampled in mud exploded.
mm, mhm, mhm. It's along the notion of soul and karma and
Yeah.
evolutionary perspective of soul's evolution and experiences it's meant to go through. Each one of us is individual, unique blueprint that we are going through, and how it's actually perfect, exactly where everyone is at with whatever state they are, and obviously with this choice point or the it's almost like it doesn't happen any earlier than it's meant
Hmm.
to for each one of us, because we got to be prime at a certain level of karma cause and effect of the energy DNA, um, life, death, the spiral, the non-linear time, all of it. uh, it's like not to resist where our own unique story, in a way,
Hmm.
our own unique archetype character in the movie, and to fully embrace it, and along the motion of our wounds become our greatest gifts if we embrace them, the totality of expression of something.
Hmm. And I love a person who throws the dice of fate and frowns upon fate approaching them. Why? Because it's their downfall. Downfall in the positive sense because it's their source of joy. They're in a state they're in a state of powerlessness and they frown upon this fate, but they realize that this is solidarity, self-conquest, and experimentation. Where others fumble this fate, this one plays with it.
Mm. It's so about the eyes we see through, the perspective, right?
Yeah. And to conclude for today with a quote from Voltaire: "For believe me, friends, error too has its merits." There's a link in the description for the Men's Academy and her YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and comment to her, and say that I sent you there. Appreciate Mila for accepting the invitation and this beautiful, beautiful, words can't describe the emotions, but great conversation with you.
Thank you so much. So grateful. So, so grateful.
You're welcome. Amor fati. Love your fate.